I never thought I'd have to choose between my family and my dog. But life has a way of forcing impossible decisions on you when you least expect it. The day I signed those mortgage papers was the proudest day of my life. 30 years old, and I was finally moving out of my parents' suburban house into my very own place. A modest 2-bedroom with a small yard in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. All mine. "Congratulations, Ms. Parker," the realtor said, handing me the keys with a practiced smile. "You're officially a homeowner." I clutched those keys so tightly they left imprints on my palm. Freedom, independence, responsibility. All the things I'd been working toward for years while living with my parents, saving every penny I could from my marketing job. My parents had always been protective. Maybe overprotective is the better word. My father, a high school principal with firm beliefs about how things should be done, and my mother, a pediatric nurse who never stopped seeing me as her patient. They meant well, I know that. But at 30, I was more than ready to make my own decisions, my own mistakes. The first week in my new house, I slept on a mattress on the floor and ate takeout straight from the containers. My furniture would arrive gradually as my budget allowed. But I didn't care. I walked around in my pajamas until noon on Saturday, played music without headphones, and left dishes in the sink overnight, just because I could. I work remotely most days as a digital marketing specialist, so I set up a corner of the living room as my temporary office until I could properly furnish the second bedroom. My company creates marketing campaigns for pet food brands and animal shelters, among other clients. It's funny how the universe plants seeds sometimes. 2 weeks after moving in, I was working on a campaign for a local animal shelter when I saw him. A golden Labrador with soulful eyes and a slightly crooked ear. The shelter had posted his photo. With the caption, "Buddy, 2 years old, needs a forever home." I wasn't planning to get a pet so soon after moving. It wasn't in my carefully constructed budget spreadsheet, but something about those eyes pulled at me. That night, I dreamed about taking walks with a golden dog trotting happily beside me. The next morning, I found myself driving to the shelter just to look. 4 hours later, Buddy was sitting in the passenger seat of my car, his head tilted curiously as if asking, "Where are we going?" "Home, Buddy," I told him, reaching over to scratch behind his ears. "We're going home." I hadn't grown up with pets. My father was allergic to cats, and my mother thought dogs were too messy and unpredictable. My sister Melissa had once brought home a stray kitten when she was 9, and the resulting family drama ended with the kitten being rehomed with our neighbor and Melissa crying for days. So bringing Buddy home was more than just adopting a pet. It was asserting my independence in a whole new way. I was making a choice my parents would never have allowed under their roof. That first evening with Buddy, we explored the backyard together. It wasn't much, but it was enough for him to sniff around and mark his territory. I watched him trot around, his tail wagging, and felt something settle in my chest. A sense of rightness, completeness. That night, despite having bought him a plush dog bed, Buddy jumped up onto my mattress on the floor and settled against my side with a contented sigh. I fell asleep with my hand resting on his warm fur, feeling less alone than I had in years. The challenges of dog ownership became apparent quickly. There were accidents on my new carpet, chewed shoes, and early morning walks in the rain. But there was also unrestrained joy when I came home from the office. Peaceful evenings with him sprawled across my lap while I watched TV, and the comforting rhythm of his breathing as he slept. I posted photos of Buddy on social media, proudly, showing off my new companion. Friends commented with heart emojis and "so cute" messages. My sister Melissa sent a text saying he was adorable, but asked if I was sure I was ready for a dog. My parents didn't comment at all. I invited my family over for dinner the following Sunday, partly to show off my new place now that I had actual furniture, and partly to introduce them to Buddy. I spent all day cleaning, cooking my mother's lasagna recipe, and giving Buddy a bath so he'd look his best. They arrived exactly at 5 p.m. My father never tolerated lateness. My mother brought a houseplant and a container of homemade cookies. Melissa brought a bottle of wine. They all brought opinions. The neighborhood seems safe enough, my father said, which in his language was high praise. You've done a nice job. With the place, my mother added, though I caught her running a finger along the bookshelf, checking for dust. Melissa wandered around, wine glass in hand. It's cute, small, but cute. Then Buddy came bounding in from the backyard where I'd temporarily sequestered him. He was all wagging tail and excited energy as he greeted my family. My father stiffened. You got a dog? This is Buddy, I said, trying to keep my voice casual as I scratched behind his ears. I adopted him last week. My mother's smile tightened. Oh, Emily, a dog is such a huge responsibility. Are you sure you've thought this through? I have, I assured her, though her question made me feel like I was 16 again, asking to borrow the car. He's great company, and the yard is perfect for him. Dogs are expensive, my father pointed out. Vet bills, food, training, and they destroy things. I'm aware of the costs, I said, a little more firmly. I've budgeted for it. Melissa, always. The peacemaker jumped in. He's really cute, Em. Does he know any tricks? Grateful for the diversion, I showed them how Buddy could sit, stay, and give his paw. He performed perfectly, earning a reluctant smile from my mother and a pat on the head from Melissa. My father remained unmoved. Dinner was awkward. Buddy kept trying to rest his head on my father's knee, sensing a challenge perhaps, and my father kept pushing him away. My mother asked pointed questions about my long-term plans for the dog if I ever wanted to travel. Melissa tried to keep conversation flowing by talking about her job at the bank and her latest dating disaster. By the time they left, I felt drained. Buddy must have sensed my mood because he rested his head on my lap as soon as I sat down on the couch, looking up at me with those soulful eyes. Don't worry, I told him, running my fingers through his soft fur. They'll come around eventually. And even if they don't, you're staying. Over the next few months, Buddy and I settled into a comfortable routine. Morning walks before work, longer explorations of the neighborhood on weekends. I found a dog park nearby where Buddy could run off leash, and I started recognizing the regular dog owners who frequented it. There was Mike with his border collie, an older woman named Ruth with a pair of dachshunds, and Jason with his German shepherd. Jason was about my age, with kind eyes and an easy laugh. We started timing our visits to coincide, and our conversations gradually extended beyond dogs to movies, books, and work. My parents continued to be coolly tolerant of Buddy during their visits. My mother would bring him dog treats, but wouldn't pet him if he had outdoor fur on him. My father acknowledged his existence, but complained if Buddy so much as shed a single hair on his pants. Melissa was warmer, sometimes bringing Buddy toys or sitting on the floor to play with him. But even she would make comments like, "I don't know how you deal with all the hair," or "Don't you miss being able to just go out after work without rushing home?" I didn't. Before Buddy, I'd often work late simply because there was no reason to hurry home. Now, knowing he was waiting for me, my days had more structure, more purpose. One Tuesday morning in early spring, about 6 months after, I'd moved into my house. My boss called me into a virtual meeting. "Emily, we've got an amazing opportunity," she said, her face animated on my computer screen. "The San Francisco animal shelter chain wants to completely revamp their adoption campaign, and they specifically requested you based on the work you did for the local shelter." My heart jumped. This would be my biggest project yet. The catch is, they want someone on site for the initial 2 months to really get a feel for their operations and build relationships with their team. I know it's asking a lot, but this could be huge for your career. San Francisco. 2 months. A wave of excitement rushed through me, followed immediately by concern as I glanced at Buddy, napping in the patch of sunlight by my feet. "I'd need to figure out arrangements for my dog," I said slowly. My boss nodded. "Of course, take a day or two to think about it, But Emily, this is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come along often. After the call ended, I paced around the house, my mind racing. Professional opportunities like this were rare, especially working for my small agency. This could lead to a promotion, more responsibility, maybe even a raise that would make my mortgage payments less stressful. But 2 months was a long time to be away from Buddy. I researched dog boarding facilities, but the cost for such a long stay was prohibitive. My few close friends in the area had their own pets or lived in no-pet apartments. That left family. My parents were out of the question. They barely tolerated Buddy during brief visits. But Melissa, she had a townhouse with a small yard. She'd always been the softie in the family, and despite her occasional comments, she seemed to genuinely like Buddy. I invited her over for dinner that weekend, made her favorite pasta, and opened a good bottle of wine before broaching the subject. "So, I've been offered an amazing project opportunity," I began, refilling her wine glass. "But it would require me to be in San Francisco for about 2 months. "That's fantastic, Em," Melissa exclaimed. "San Francisco? That sounds exciting." "It is," I agreed. "But there's a complication." I glanced meaningfully at Buddy, who was chewing contentedly on a bone at the edge of the dining area. Melissa followed my gaze, and understanding dawned on her face. "Oh, I know it's a lot to ask," I hurried on. "But would you consider watching him? You could stay here at my place if that's easier. It's closer to your work anyway. I'd cover all his expenses, of course, and I'd owe you big time." Melissa took a sip of her wine, considering. 2 months is a long time, Em. I know. And if you can't do it, I completely understand. I'll figure something else out. Though I wasn't sure what that would be. She looked at Buddy again, who, sensing he was being discussed, came over and put his head on her knee, looking up with those irresistible eyes. "Oh, you're good," she laughed, scratching his ears. "You know exactly how to work it, don't you?" She sighed and turned back to me. "All right, I'll do it, but you'll really owe me one." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're the best sister ever." "I know," she said with a grin. "But seriously, I'll need a detailed list of his routine, vet information, all that stuff." "Of course, I'll write everything down. And we can do a trial run. Maybe you can stay over next weekend to get used to his schedule?" Melissa agreed, and we spent the rest of the evening planning. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This could work. Buddy knew Melissa, and while they weren't best friends, they got along well enough. And it was only for 2 months. The following weekend, Melissa stayed over to get familiar with Buddy's routine. There were a few hiccups. She wasn't thrilled about the early morning walks, or the way Buddy insisted on sleeping in the bedroom, but overall, it seemed manageable. "He's actually pretty well behaved," she admitted as we drank coffee on Sunday morning after she'd successfully navigated the morning walk. "I was expecting worse based on how much you talk about his training challenges." "He's come a long way," I said proudly, watching as Buddy gnawed on his chew toy. "We've been working really hard on his recall command and leash manners." "Well, it shows," Melissa said, and I felt a surge of gratitude toward my sister. The next few weeks flew by in a flurry of preparation. Work arrangements, packing, creating a detailed care guide for Buddy that was probably overkill but made me feel better. I stocked the pantry and fridge with Melissa's favorite snacks, made sure the guest room was comfortable, and bought enough dog food, treats, and supplies to last the full 2 months. The night before my departure, I lay in bed. With Buddy curled up against me, I buried my face in his fur, breathing in his familiar doggy scent. "Be good for Aunt Melissa," I whispered. "I'll be back before you know it. I promise." Buddy licked my hand, his brown eyes watching me trustingly. My chest tightened. This would be the longest we'd been apart since I'd adopted him. The next morning was a blur of last-minute instructions and reassurances. "His vet's number is on the fridge, and I've added you as an authorized contact," I told Melissa as I dragged my suitcase to the door. The neighbor, Mrs. Chen, has a spare key in case of emergencies. She loves Buddy and won't mind helping out, if needed. Emily, we'll be fine, Melissa said, a hint of exasperation in her voice. It's just a dog. I've got this. I bit back a correction. Buddy wasn't just a dog to me, and instead gave her another hug. Thank you again for doing this. Really. I knelt down to give Buddy one last cuddle. Be good, Buddy. I love you. I'll be back soon. As the rideshare pulled away from the curb, I looked back to see Melissa and Buddy standing in the doorway of my little house. Buddy was watching the car, his tail low, and I felt tears prick at my eyes. It's just 2 months, I muttered to myself, turning to face forward. He'll be fine. San Francisco was a whirlwind of meetings, site visits to various shelters, brainstorming sessions, and networking events. The work was challenging and rewarding in exactly the way I'd hoped. The shelter chain loved my ideas for their campaign, and my boss was thrilled with the progress. I video called Melissa every few days to check in. The first couple of weeks, she answered reliably, usually with Buddy visible in the background, or sometimes on her lap. We went to the dog park today, she reported during one call. He's made friends with a husky named Luna. That's great, I said, relieved to see him looking content. Has he been sleeping okay? Like a log, Melissa assured me, though he still tries to get on the bed sometimes. I laughed. Yeah, he's persistent about that. How are you doing? Is staying at my place working out okay? It's fine, she said. Actually, it's nice being closer to work. And I've had a couple of friends over for dinner. They all love Buddy. This was going better than I dared hope. By the end of the first month, though, the updates became less frequent and detailed. Melissa started missing some of our scheduled calls, texting later with excuses about work running late or plans with friends. When we did connect, Buddy wasn't always visible. He's in the backyard, or he's napping in the other room, Melissa would say. Her updates became briefer. Everything's fine, or we're all good here. A tiny seed of worry planted itself in my mind, but I pushed it aside. Melissa was doing me a huge favor. She wasn't going to document Buddy's every move just to ease my separation anxiety. 5 weeks into my stay, I got a text from Melissa at an odd hour. So sorry, but had a small accident with one of Buddy's toys. He shredded his blue elephant. I'll replace it. The blue elephant was Buddy's favorite toy, the one he'd had since the shelter. He carried it around the house and slept with it often. It was looking ragged, but he'd never destroyed it. That's strange, I texted back. He loves that elephant. Is he feeling okay? He's fine, came the reply. Just got a little excited. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The next time we video called, 3 days later, I asked to see Buddy. Oh, he's at the groomer's, Melissa said, not quite meeting. My eyes through the screen. He was getting pretty shaggy. I frowned. I didn't know you were planning to take him to a groomer. It was a last-minute decision. Don't worry, I found one with great reviews. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something was nagging at me, a feeling that things weren't quite right back home. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Melissa was perfectly capable of caring for Buddy. But the worry persisted. The next day, I texted Mrs. Chen, my neighbor, under the guise of checking on my houseplants. Everything looks fine from what I can see, she replied. Though I haven't noticed your sister walking the dog much lately. Is she taking him somewhere else for exercise? The worry crystallized into proper concern. Buddy needed his walks. He got anxious and destructive without enough exercise. I hadn't seen him on our last few calls, and now Mrs. Chen's comment. I called Melissa that evening. It rang several times before going to voicemail. I left a message asking her to call me back as soon as possible, trying to keep the anxiety out of my voice. An hour later, she called. Hey, what's up? She asked, sounds of laughter and music in the background. Where are you? I asked. It sounds busy. Oh, just having a few friends over, she said. Is Buddy okay with all the people? He can get overwhelmed sometimes. There was a pause. He's fine. He's actually staying with a friend of mine for a few days. My friend has a dog too, and they get along great. The knot in my stomach tightened. Which friend? Why didn't you tell me? It's not a big deal, Em. My apartment flooded, and I needed to stay at your place while they fix it, and my friend offered to take Buddy so he wouldn't be stressed with all the coming and going. Your apartment flooded? When? Why didn't you tell me? Questions tumbled out of me. It just happened a couple of days ago. I didn't want to worry you when you're so busy with work. None of this made sense. Melissa, where is Buddy? I want to see him. I told you, he's with my friend. Look, can we talk about this tomorrow? My friends are waiting. No, we can't. I want you to go get Buddy and show him to me on video right now. I can't just leave my friends. Melissa. My voice was steel now. Where is my dog? The background noise faded as if she'd moved to a different room. When she spoke again, her voice was different, defensive. Look, I tried, okay? But that dog is a lot of work. He needs constant attention and exercise, and with my job and social life, it was just too much. My heart was hammering now. What are you saying? Where is he? A long pause. I took him to a shelter. The world stopped. You did what? It was a good shelter, she hurried to add. The one where you got him. I explained the situation, that you were out of town and I couldn't care for him properly. They said they'd find him a good home. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. When? I managed. About a week ago. A week. Buddy had been in a shelter for a week while I thought he was safe at home. My sweet, sensitive dog who hated being left alone, back in a kennel surrounded by barking and unfamiliar smells. How could... You? My voice shook. You promised me. You promised to take care of him. I tried, Emily, but he was too much. He whined when left alone. He needed walks 3 times a day. He kept getting into things. Because that's what dogs do. You knew what you were agreeing to. I wrote everything down for you. Anger was replacing shock now. I have to go. Emily. Wait! I ended the call and immediately dialed the local shelter. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Valley Animal Shelter, how can I help you? A cheerful voice answered. My name is Emily Parker. I adopted a dog from you about 8 months ago, a golden lab named Buddy. My sister brought him back to you about a week ago without my knowledge or consent. I need to know if he's still there. There was a pause, the sound of typing. Let me check our records. Parker, Buddy. Each second felt like an eternity. Yes, we do have a record of Buddy being returned by a Melissa Parker on the 12th, but I'm not seeing him in our current resident list. My heart sank. What does that mean? Where is he? It could mean several things. He might have been transferred to another facility if we were at capacity, or... She hesitated. Or what? I prompted, though I knew. Or he may have been adopted already. Our golden labs don't usually stay long. Adopted. Someone else had my dog, my Buddy. I need to know which it is, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm his owner. I never authorized him to be surrendered. I was out of town and my sister was watching him. I understand, the shelter worker said, her voice sympathetic now. This is unusual. Let me check with my manager and see what we can find out. Can I call you back? I gave her my number and hung up, then immediately booked a flight home for the next morning. I called my boss next, explaining the emergency in fragmented sentences. Go, she said without hesitation. We've got enough to work with here. Family comes first. Family. The word tasted bitter now. I spent the night alternating between rage at Melissa and paralyzing fear for Buddy. Was he scared? Did he think I'd abandoned him? Had he already bonded with a new family, or was he in another shelter, confused and alone? The shelter called back just as I was leaving for the airport. Ms. Parker? I've checked our transfer records, and it looks Like Buddy was moved to County Animal Services 3 days ago. They have more space and longer holding periods. Relief made my knees weak. So he hasn't been adopted? Not according to our records, but you should contact them directly to be sure. I thanked her and immediately called County Animal Services, but got a recording saying they were closed until 10 a.m. My flight was at 7, landing at 11:30. I'd go straight there. The flight was torture. Every minute felt like an hour as I stared out the window, willing the plane to move faster. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. All I could think about was Buddy, alone in a concrete kennel, wondering why his world had been turned upside down again. As soon as we landed, I turned on my phone to find several missed calls and texts from Melissa. Emily, please call me back. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do. Please let me explain. I ignored them all and called a rideshare directly to County Animal Services. The facility was larger than our local shelter, with long rows of kennels in a building that smelled strongly of disinfectant and wet dog. I approached the front desk, my heart in my throat. I'm looking for my dog, I told the clerk, a young man with kind eyes. He was transferred here from Valley Animal Shelter a few days ago. His name is Buddy. He's a golden lab, about 2.5 years old now. He nodded and typed something into his computer. Do you have any proof of ownership? I pulled out my phone and showed him photos of Buddy and me together, his adoption papers that I'd scanned, vet records. He has a small white mark on his chest, and his left ear is a little crooked, I added. He was surrendered without my knowledge or consent while I was out of town. The clerk looked through the documents, then at the photos. Let me check our current residence. More typing. A frown. My heart skipped. I'm showing we received a golden lab matching that description 3 days ago, but... He paused, checking something else. It looks like he was moved to the adoption floor yesterday. So he's still here? Hope flared. Let me check. He picked up a phone, spoke quietly to someone for a moment, then looked back at me. Yes, he's here. He's actually scheduled for a meet and greet with a potential adopter in about an hour. I need to see him now, I said, my voice cracking. Please, he's my dog. The clerk nodded, seeming to understand the urgency. Wait here. I'll have someone bring him to the visiting room. The 5 minutes I waited felt like 5 years. Then a door opened, and a shelter worker entered with Buddy on a leash. He looked thinner, his coat less shiny. For a heart-stopping moment, I feared he wouldn't recognize me. Then his nose twitched. He looked up, and his entire body seemed to vibrate with recognition. The worker barely had time to unhook his leash before Buddy was bounding across the room, whining and wiggling, his whole body wagging along with his tail. I dropped to my knees and caught him, burying my face in his fur as he licked every part. Of me he could reach, still making those high-pitched whines that broke my heart and mended it simultaneously. I'm sorry, I whispered over and over. I'm so sorry, Buddy. I've got you now. You're coming home. There was paperwork, of course, proof of ownership to verify, a reclamation fee to pay. I didn't care. I would have paid 10 times the amount just to have him back. As we walked out too, the waiting rideshare, Buddy pressed so close to my side he was nearly tripping me, as if afraid I'd disappear again. I couldn't blame him. It's okay, I reassured him, stroking his head. We're going home, and I'm never leaving you again. The driver looked skeptically at Buddy, who was shedding noticeably in the back seat, but I didn't care. I'd pay extra for the cleanup. Nothing mattered except that Buddy was with me. When we pulled up to my house, I was surprised to see Melissa's car in the driveway. A surge of anger rose in me, but I tamped it down. First, I needed to get Buddy settled. Buddy recognized home immediately, pulling excitedly on the leash as we approached the front door. Inside, everything looked mostly as I'd left it, though there were subtle signs of Melissa's extended stay, different throw pillows on the couch, wine glasses in the dish rack, a jacket I didn't recognize draped over a chair, and Melissa herself, rising from the couch as we entered, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Emily, thank God. I've been trying to reach you." She stopped, short when she saw Buddy. "You found him." "No thanks to you," I said coldly, unclipping Buddy's leash. He immediately began exploring the house, sniffing everything as if reassuring himself it was all still there. "I can explain," Melissa began. "Explain what? How you abandoned my dog at a shelter? How you lied to me for days about where he was? How you broke every promise you made?" "I didn't know what else to do," she exclaimed. "He was too much work, and then my apartment really did have a plumbing issue, and I needed to stay here, and I had friends over, and he kept getting in the way?" "Getting in the way?" I repeated incredulously. "He lives here, Melissa. You were staying in his home, not the other way around." "I know, but no. There's no excuse for what you did. You could have called me. You could have asked for help. You could have done literally anything except abandon him at a shelter." Melissa's face hardened. "You're being dramatic. It was a good shelter, the same one you got him from. I knew they'd take care of him." "He was terrified," I shouted, the memory of his thin body and anxious eyes fueling my anger. "Do you have any idea what it's like for a dog to be back in a shelter? To think he's been abandoned again? To be surrounded by barking and strange smells, wondering what he did wrong, why his person left him?" Buddy, hearing the tension in my voice, came back to my side, leaning against my legs supportively. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "For his sake." "I need you to leave," I said, more quietly but no less firmly. "Emily, come on. I said I was sorry." "No, you didn't, actually. But even if you had, it wouldn't be enough. I trusted you with the most important thing in my world, and you threw him away like he was nothing." "He's just a dog," Melissa exclaimed in frustration. As soon as the words left her mouth, we both knew she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Get out," I said, my voice ice. "Take your things and go, now." She stared at me for a long moment, then shook her head. "You're choosing a dog over your own sister. Do you know how insane that sounds? I'm choosing someone who loves me unconditionally, over someone who breaks promises and abandons those who depend on her. Doesn't sound insane to me at all." Melissa's face flushed. She gathered her purse and jacket, pausing at the door. "Mom and Dad are going to think you've lost your mind. I don't care what they think. And for the record, I don't think I'm the one who's lost something here." After she left, I sank to the floor, and Buddy immediately crawled into my lap, all 70 pounds of him, whining softly and licking my tears. I hadn't even realized I was crying. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, holding him close. "I'm never going to leave you again, I promise." That night, Buddy slept pressed against me, waking frequently to check if I was still there. Each time, I stroked his fur and murmured reassurances until he settled again. My own sleep was fitful, punctuated by dreams of searching endless shelter. Kennels, calling Buddy's name. The next morning, my phone rang. My mother. "Emily, what's going on? Melissa is absolutely distraught." I took a deep breath. "Did she tell you what she did?" "She said you're overreacting about the dog, that she had a difficult situation and made the best decision she could. Of course, that's how she'd frame it. Mom, she abandoned Buddy at a shelter without telling me. She lied to me for days about where he was. By the time I found him, he was already on the adoption floor, about to be given to another family." "Well, I'm sure she didn't mean any harm," my mother said in her "let's be reasonable" voice. "You know Melissa has always been impulsive, and taking care of a dog is a big responsibility. A responsibility she willingly took on," I pointed out. "She promised me she could handle it." "Yes, well, we all make promises we can't keep sometimes. The important thing is that you got your dog back, so everything worked out. Now you need to make peace with your sister." I closed my eyes, counting to 10 silently. "Mom, do you understand what could have happened? If I hadn't gotten back when I did, Buddy would be gone, given to strangers. I would never have seen him again. Don't be dramatic, Emily. You could have gotten another dog. And there it was, the fundamental disconnect. To my family, Buddy was replaceable, interchangeable with any other friendly canine. Just a dog. I need to go, Mom. I have work to catch up on. Emily, wait. Your father and I think you should come to dinner on Sunday. Melissa will be there, and we can all talk this through like adults. Like adults. As if I was the one being childish for being upset about nearly losing my dog forever. I don't think that's a good idea right now. Emily Rose Parker, my mother said, pulling out the full name card. Family comes first, always. I didn't raise you to hold grudges. The irony of her lecturing me about family values when she dismissed my feelings so completely wasn't lost on me. I'll think about it, I said, knowing I wouldn't. Goodbye, Mom. Spent the day reconnecting with Buddy, taking him for long walks, playing fetch in the backyard, and generally reassuring both of us that we were together again. I ordered his favorite blue elephant toy online with expedited shipping and scheduled a vet appointment to make sure he was okay after his shelter stay. My boss was understanding about my abrupt departure, especially when I explained the situation. I'd accomplished enough in San Francisco that the team could finish without me, and I could work remotely on the final campaign elements. Take the rest of the week, she suggested. You've earned it, and it sounds like you both need some recovery. Time. I was beyond grateful. Buddy was showing signs of separation anxiety, following me from room to room and getting anxious if I so much as went to the bathroom with the door closed. I needed to be present for him, to rebuild his trust. My father called the next day, his tone indicating he'd been delegated the task by my mother. Your mother says you're refusing to come to dinner on Sunday, he began without preamble. I said I'd think about it. Which we all know means no. He sighed. Emily, this has gone far enough. Melissa made a mistake, but she's your sister. Blood is thicker than water. Dad, she abandoned my dog at a shelter. She lied to me about it. She betrayed my trust in the worst possible way. It was a bad decision, yes, but she's family. That dog is, well, just a pet. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of sadness. They would never understand. Never see Buddy as I did, as a sentient being with feelings, as a member of my family in his own right. I can't do this right now, Dad. Tell Mom I'll call her next week. Emily, I ended the call, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Anger at Melissa, disappointment in my parents, but mostly a deep sadness that the people who were supposed to love me most couldn't understand or respect something so fundamental to my happiness. Buddy, sensing my mood, brought me his rope toy, nudging it into my hand as if to say, let's play instead of being sad. I smiled despite myself and obliged him, marveling at his resilience and his intuitive understanding of human emotions. That Saturday, as Buddy and I were returning from our morning walk, I spotted a familiar figure at the dog park across the street, Jason, with his German Shepherd. He waved when he saw us, and after a moment's hesitation, I waved back. Buddy recognized them too, pulling excitedly on his leash. I hadn't seen them since before my trip. Let's go say hi, I suggested. And Buddy wagged enthusiastically. As we approached the dog park fence, Jason smiled broadly. Emily, you're back. We've missed you guys at the park. We've missed you too, I admitted, unclipping Buddy's leash as we entered the enclosure. He immediately ran to greet Shadow, Jason's dog, and they began their usual play routine. How was San Francisco? Jason asked, moving to sit on a bench. I joined him, watching our dogs play. Work-wise, it was great. Otherwise, I trailed off, not sure I wanted to get into the whole story. Jason must have sensed something in my tone. Everything okay? I hesitated, then found myself telling him everything. Melissa's promise, her betrayal, my frantic return, the family, fallout. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly concerned. That's horrible, he said when I finished. I can't even imagine how terrifying that must have been. The worst part is that my family doesn't understand why I'm so upset, I said, watching Buddy chase Shadow in a wide circle. They think I'm overreacting. You're not, Jason said firmly. What she did was a serious breach of trust. And Buddy isn't just a dog, he's family. I looked at him in surprise, feeling a rush of gratitude that someone finally got it. Exactly. For what it's worth, Jason continued, I think you're handling it remarkably well. I might not be speaking to my sibling at all if they did something like that. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching our dogs play. Shadow seemed to be deliberately engaging Buddy, drawing him into games, almost as if he sensed his friend needed extra attention. Would you like to get coffee sometime? Jason asked suddenly. Or dinner? I've been wanting to ask for a while, but I felt a smile spread across my face, the first genuine smile in days. I'd like that, a lot. By Sunday, I'd decided not to go to my parents' dinner. Instead, I texted my mother. Not ready yet. Need more time. I'll call next week. Her reply was predictably disappointed, with an undercurrent of emotional manipulation. We're all very hurt that you're choosing to exclude yourself from family time. Melissa is devastated. We raised you better than this. I set my phone aside without responding. Buddy and I spent the day at home, working in the garden, watching movies on the couch, and generally enjoying our reunion. The new blue elephant toy had arrived, and Buddy carried it everywhere, seemingly even more attached to it than to the original. That evening, as I was making dinner, the doorbell rang. Buddy barked once, alerting but not alarmed. I peered through the peephole to see Melissa standing on my porch, holding what looked like a shopping bag. My first instinct was to pretend I wasn't home, but that felt cowardly. Besides, Buddy's bark had already given us away. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. What do you want, Melissa? She looked tired, her usual polished appearance slightly dimmed. Can I come in? Just for a minute? After a long pause, I stepped aside. Buddy, who had been standing by my side, retreated a few steps, watching Melissa warily. That, more than anything, made my heart ache. He remembered who had taken him from his home. I brought some things, Melissa said, setting the bag on the cheap coffee table. For Buddy. I raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. She began taking items out of the bag. A new collar in deep blue leather, a bag of premium dog treats, a plush squirrel toy. I know it doesn't fix anything, she said quietly. But I am sorry, Emily. I panicked. The responsibility was more than I expected. And then when my apartment had issues and I needed to stay here, it just felt like too much. You could have called me, I said, my voice tight. You could have told me you were struggling. We could have figured something out together. I know, I should have. But I was embarrassed. You make it look so easy, and I couldn't even manage for a few weeks. She glanced at Buddy, who was still keeping his distance. I didn't realize how much it would hurt him. I thought shelters were nice places, that he'd be okay, there until you got back and claimed him. Shelters do their best, I acknowledged. But they're still stressful environments for animals, and Buddy has abandonment issues from before I adopted him, being left there again. I couldn't finish the sentence, the emotion still too raw. Melissa nodded, looking genuinely contrite for the first time. I'm sorry, she repeated. I really am. To both of you. She looked directly at Buddy now. I'm sorry, Buddy. I didn't understand. Buddy tilted his head, as if considering her words, but made no move to approach her. It's going to take time, I said, not specifying whether I meant for Buddy or for me. Perhaps both. I know. Melissa stood, hesitating. Mom and Dad are pretty upset that you skipped dinner. I'm not ready to pretend everything's fine for the sake of family harmony. I get that. But they're never going to understand, Emily. Not the way you want them to. Dogs have never been important to them. She was right, and we both knew it. My parents would always see this as an overreaction on my part, a case of misplaced priorities. I need some time, I said finally. I'm not saying I'll never forgive you or that we won't move past this, but I can't just pretend it didn't happen. Because it makes everyone uncomfortable, Melissa nodded. Fair enough. She moved toward the door, then paused. He's lucky to have you, you know. Most people wouldn't have gone to the lengths you did. After she left, I sat on the floor beside Buddy, who immediately crawled into my lap, elephant toy in mouth. What do you think? I asked him. Should we give her another chance? Buddy dropped his toy and licked my hand, which I chose to interpret as measured forgiveness. Conditional, but possible. The next few weeks were about healing and establishing new normals. Buddy gradually stopped following me from room to room, though he still liked to keep me in sight when possible. I worked from home more often, arranging with my boss to limit future travel to shorter trips that a dog sitter could handle, one with excellent references whom I'd interviewed extensively. Jason and I started dating officially, first coffee, then dinner, then weekend hikes with the dogs. He understood my bond with Buddy without explanation, and that meant more to me than I could express. My relationship with my family remained strained. I spoke with my mother weekly, carefully steering conversations away from the Buddy incident, as she'd taken to calling it. My father, never one for emotional discussions, seemed content to pretend nothing had happened. Melissa and I were cautiously rebuilding, starting with brief texts, then occasional coffee meets in neutral locations. About a month after the shelter ordeal, I invited Jason over for dinner. As we sat on the back patio afterward, watching our dogs chase fireflies in the yard, he asked the question that had been hovering between us. Do you think you'll ever fully forgive your sister? I considered carefully. I think I already have, in many ways. What she did was wrong, but I understand she was overwhelmed and made a bad decision. The harder part is accepting that my family will never see Buddy the way I do, as a being with real feelings, as someone who matters deeply. Jason nodded, watching as Shadow gently wrestled with Buddy, both dogs clearly enjoying themselves. Some people never get it, but some of us do. The simple validation in those words warmed me more than he could know. When I was a kid, he continued, my grandmother used to say that you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat animals. Not just whether they're kind or cruel, but whether they see them as individuals with their own personalities and feelings. I leaned against his shoulder, feeling a deep sense of contentment. Your grandmother sounds wise. She was. She also said that sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. I thought about that as I watched Buddy, now lying contentedly in the grass beside Shadow, about how this golden dog with the crooked ear had changed my life in ways I never expected, how he'd taught me about unconditional love, about standing up for what I believed in, about the family we choose. I think she was right, I said softly. The following Sunday, after much deliberation, I agreed to dinner at my parents' house. Melissa would be there, and I knew there would be an expectation of putting it all behind us. For my own peace, I decided to go, but I would bring Buddy with me. If they wanted me in their lives, they needed to accept him too. Are you sure? About this? Jason asked when I told him my plan. We were at the dog park, our usual weekend spot. No, I admitted. But I have to try. They're still my family, even if they don't understand this part of my life. He squeezed my hand supportively. Call me after if you need to talk. When I arrived at my parents' house with Buddy on his leash, my mother opened the door and immediately frowned. You brought the dog? His name is Buddy, I corrected gently. And yes, he's part of my life now. Where I go, he goes. She pursed her lips but stepped aside. Well, please keep him off the furniture. Your father just had the living room set reupholstered. Inside, my father nodded a greeting from his armchair, eyeing Buddy suspiciously. Melissa was already seated on the couch, and she offered a tentative smile. I could sense she was nervous about seeing Buddy again. Dinner was awkward, with conversation sticking to safe topics like work and the weather. Buddy lay at my feet under the table, occasionally sighing, but otherwise being a perfect gentleman. After dessert, as we moved back to the living room, my mother cleared her throat. "Emily, we've been talking, and we think it's time to put this whole unfortunate incident behind us. Melissa made a mistake, but she's apologized, and family needs to stick together." I felt the familiar frustration rising but tamped it down. "I appreciate that, Mom, and I am working on moving forward. But I need you all to understand something." I looked at each of them in turn. Buddy isn't just a pet to me. He's family. What happened wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was a betrayal of trust that could have had permanent consequences. My father frowned. "Emily, it's admirable that you care for your dog, but this level of attachment isn't entirely healthy. It's a dog, not a person." I stroked Buddy's head, drawing strength from his solid presence. "That distinction doesn't matter to me, Dad. What matters is that he loves me unconditionally, depends on me, and trusts me. And I owe him the same in return." "But," my mother began. "No," I interrupted firmly. "I'm not asking you to feel the same way I do. I'm just asking you to respect how I feel, to understand that in my house, Buddy isn't a second-class citizen or an afterthought. He's family." Melissa surprisingly spoke up. "She's right." All eyes turned to her. "I didn't get it before, but I'm starting to. The way Emily loves Buddy isn't weird or excessive. It's just different from how we were raised to think about pets." My parents exchanged glances, clearly not entirely convinced, but perhaps beginning to understand this wasn't a battle they would win. "Well," my mother said finally, "I suppose we can try to be more accommodating of Buddy in the future." It wasn't perfect understanding, but it was a start. A recognition, however reluctant, that this was important to me and therefore deserved some measure of respect. As I drove home that evening, Buddy dozing in the passenger seat beside me, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. From signing those mortgage papers to finding Buddy, from nearly losing him to fighting for our little family. I'd discovered strengths I didn't know I had, boundaries I needed to set, and joy I hadn't imagined possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "How did it go?" I smiled, thinking of our upcoming hiking trip, of Shadow and Buddy racing through mountain trails, of the four of us building something new and beautiful together. "Better than expected," I texted back. "Not perfect, but a start. Wanna come over tomorrow? Buddy misses Shadow." The reply came almost immediately. "We miss you both too. See you tomorrow." I glanced at Buddy, still sleeping peacefully, trusting completely in our journey home together. Home, not just a house with my name on the mortgage, but a place where both of us belonged, where we were understood and valued for exactly who we were. "We're almost home, Buddy," I whispered, and his ear twitched in his sleep, as if he heard me even in his dreams. In the end, maybe that's what family really means. Not the one you're born into, with all its expectations and limitations, but the one you create, person by person, paw by paw, heart by heart. A place where love doesn't need to be explained or justified, where belonging is never conditional, and where home is wherever you are together.